Hello, everybody, and welcome to our lecture video series for Friday, April 28th. I cannot believe it's almost May. That is crazy to me. Congrats for making it this far to all of us. Round of applause. So, in general, what we are talking about today is we are focusing on how to determine the heat of reaction using theoretical means. So, if you recall what we talked about on Wednesday, we looked at using calorimetric data or changes in temperature changes in temperature, to try to determine the heat exchange between a reactant particle system and its surrounding solution, and that allowed us to determine the change in enthalpy of a reaction calculated per mole of product formed. So that is one way to determine the heat of reaction is through calorimetry. However, there are a couple of different means that we have of calculating the heat of reaction that are not reliant on any kind of empirical observation or any kind of data collection. So this is what I mean when I say calculating the heat of a reaction theoretically. We are going to use some theoretical understanding of different reactions and the energies involved in them in order to calculate the heat of some reaction of interest. So the first way that we're going to do this is we're going to look at something called the standard enthalpy of formation, or the standard heat of formation, delta HF, where this little degree up here, not, means at standard conditions. We'll talk about that in a moment. And from the standard heat of formation definition, we will practice an example of determining the heat of reaction. So we'll look at the combustion of acetylene gas and see if we can't figure out the heat of that reaction based on what we know about the standard heat of formation. So this is kind of like our first means of figuring out the heat of reaction theoretically. And then the second means we have is by applying something called Hess's law. And we will apply Hess's law in an example where we look for the heat of reaction for the oxidation of elemental sulfur. So this is method 2. So the main basis behind both of these methods is that we need to recall that enthalpy is a state function. Where, remember, when we're talking about a state function, what that means is it can be calculated according to a difference between some final and initial state. That's what that delta means, right? State function. So I could get the heat of reaction by looking at some final state enthalpy and how that compares to some initial state enthalpy. And because we only care about final and initial states, or starting and winding up states, then this allows us to use these two theoretical methods without breaking any rules of physics. So let's get started in our next video where we introduce this first method of determining the heat of a reaction theoretically, which is looking at using the standard heat or standard enthalpy of formation.